From war hero to propane salesman and now a head chef, the Hills have taken us on a journey spanning generations of Texan life. Cotton's wild exploits on the battlefield, Hank's steady devotion to propane and family values, and Bobby's path towards the culinary arts all paint a portrait of both ordinary and extraordinary. For years, they've given us stories of stubbornness, humor, heart, and the everyday struggles of suburban living in Arlen, Texas. So, fire up that grill because we're going to walk through the complete yet simplified timeline of King of the Hill, and we'll be seeing it mainly through the eyes of our head of the household, Hank Hill, the man who keeps the Hill family and Arlen itself grounded in tradition, laughter, and a whole lot of propane. So let's start off with some context, just so we're all on the same page. The timeline of King of the Hill is a little weird as it's considered a floating timeline, where characters are roughly the same age throughout the show, but real-world advancements are still represented in the show. On top of that, there are several contradictory statements made throughout the show that make certain points and events not match up very well. Regardless, we're going to try. While there are some solid dates to work with, we're going to be using Hank's life events as a means of following the timeline. With that being said, let's actually start before Hank was born with Cotton Hill, his father. Pre-Hank Hill, Cotton Hill the war hero. Hank's father, Cotton Hill, was born in the 1920s in Texas and grew up during the Great Depression. By his teens, he's already stubborn and fiery, eager to prove himself, and in 1942, as a teenager, he lied about his age to enlist in the army, beginning the service that would make him a soldier in World War II, where he claims to have fought in both the European and Pacific theaters, killing 50 men during his time in war. In 1945, his service was cut short, literally, when he lost both his shins to machine gun fire while at the Battle of Okinawa. This wouldn't stop him from living life though, and Cotton had his feet surgically attached to his knees, giving him the ability to continue walking on his own 2 feet. While in recovery, Cotton meets a Japanese woman named Michiko. They slowly get romantically involved with each other, unknowingly conceiving a son named Junichiro in the process. Cotton would never meet Junichiro as a baby because he abruptly moves back to the States, where he meets a woman named Tilly and eventually marries her. Back in the States, Cotton takes part in a string of small business ventures, and in 1953, one of those ventures sends him to New York, bringing along a now pregnant Tilly. This was actually part of a ploy to assassinate Fidel Castro, using Tilly as a way to gain access through Yankee Stadium security so that he could do the deed. Unfortunately, the attempt failed and Tilly had to give birth to Hank in the ladies' restroom. Yes, despite being a proud Texan, Hank Rutherford Hills was born right there in the Big Apple. 1950s to 1970s, Hank Hill, hardworking child, to peaking in high school. Being born in New York would ruin Hank's perception of himself, so Cotton and Tilly decided not to tell Hank he was born in New York. The Hills moved back to Texas, where Hank is raised up. For most of Hank's childhood, he learned to be hardworking, where he developed skills like lawn mowing, propane safety, and more. This is attributed to his environment, like growing up in Arlen, Texas, but also by his relationship with his no-nonsense father, Cotton. By the late 1960s, Hank would attend Tom Landry Middle School, where he would meet his lifelong friends Bill Dotrieve, Dale Gribble, and Boomhauer. And by lifelong, I really mean that. By the early 1970s, Hank was thriving at Arlen High School. It was during this time that he initially met and started dating Peggy Platter, his future wife. However, more importantly, on the football field, this is where Hank follows his lifelong calling as a fullback for the Arlen High football team. Under Coach Sars, Hank excels, chasing his childhood dream of going pro after graduation. His grit and determination helped propel the team all the way to the Class 2A state football championship. But in the very game that could have launched his future, Hank shatters his ankle, costing Arlen High the title and ending his hopes of a professional career. Though the championship slipped away, Hank remained a local hero, celebrated for leading his team to state. Mid-1970s to the 1980s, finding a purpose. With his injury, Hank had to reassess his future. Instead of pursuing his dream of being a professional football player after high school, Hank tried a few different things. At one point, he would try enlisting in military service, however, due to his narrow urethra, he was disqualified. He would then jump around a few different jobs before landing a stable position at Strickland Propane under Buck Strickland. This is a defining moment in his life, as this would mold his true love of propane and propane accessories. In 1973, on the romantic end of things, his relationship with Peggy Platter evolved into something more serious, more domestic, and the two high school sweethearts ended up marrying each other and settling into a modest ranch-style home in Arlen that would become their lifelong residence. Throughout the 1980s, Hank worked his way up to assistant manager at Strickland Propane, building a reputation as someone who did things the right way. Meanwhile, his better half Peggy built up her own career as a substitute Spanish teacher, and together they created a stable life centered around family, community, and backyard barbecues. Family, you say? Well, in 1985, the Hills would give birth to their one and only son, Robert Jeffrey Hill, otherwise known as Bobby, marking a new chapter in Hank's life. From that moment on, the Hills would try and guide Bobby towards becoming a responsible, hard-working young man. Keyword, try. The 90s and 2000s, the king of the hill, Luanne joins the Hills. The series begins in 1997. Hank Hill works at Strickland Propane, Peggy's a substitute teacher, and Bobby is now a curious and growing preteen boy. However, a big change is about to happen to the Hill household. Peggy's niece, Luanne Platter, moves in after her mother, Leanne, stabs her boyfriend and is sent to prison. Luanne is a 19-year-old beauty school student at the start of the series, and she brings in a much-needed mix of naivete, blind optimism, and chaos into the Hill household. Hank, a man firmly set in his ways, struggles to adjust to having Luanne under his roof. Their personalities often clash, but oftentimes he learns to adapt and find a balance in their shared home. The Megalomart explosion. Sometime later, Luanne hooks up with a boy named Buckley who works at the local Megalomart, think Walmart. However, one day, disaster hits, one that shakes up Arlen. Due to Buckley's incompetence, he mishandles a few propane tanks, which causes Megalomart to explode. The blast kills Buckley, Luanne's boyfriend, and injures many townspeople. Hank and Luanne, who were with Buckley when the accident happened, survive the blast, but the tragedy cost Hank his job at Strickland Propane, while also giving him a fear of the thing he loved best, propane. This is all temporary, of course, as he gets back his job and learns to love propane again. Peggy's accident and good Hank's birth. Fast forwarding a bit, the Hills are ready to celebrate their 20th anniversary, happy to finally have the house to themselves with Bobby at Cotton's and Luanne camping with friends. Peggy, however, feels their marriage has fallen into a rut. Hoping to shake things up, Hank takes her out for a romantic evening, but that night still falls flat and they end up back home drinking until they pass out. Hungover the next morning, they go out for breakfast and spot a group of parachutists, which sparks an idea to go skydiving. Meanwhile at Cotton's, Dee Dee, Cotton's second wife, suddenly goes into labor while Bobby is the only one at home. He drives her to the only hospital he knows in Arlen, 2 hours away, and calls Luanne for help. At the airfield, Hank makes his jump and is amazed by the view, while Peggy stays behind nervous. Luanne arrives with the baby news, and an excited Hank convinces Peggy to take the plunge. She enjoys the fall for the most part, until both parachutes fail, leaving Hank to watch in horror as she crashes to the ground. Miraculously, Peggy survives and is rushed to the same hospital where Cotton welcomes his newborn son, pointedly named Good Hank. After a very long recovery, Peggy returns home to her family and her familiar routine. The long-lost hill, Junichiro. One day, Bobby spots Cotton looking at a picture of a Japanese woman, which gives Peggy the bright idea of using Cotton's unresolved feelings for this Japanese woman to net her and her family a free trip to Japan so that she can document the reunion. They fly out to Japan. Hank and Cotton meet Junichiro, his half-brother from Cotton's wartime romance with Michiko. Junichiro is polite, respectful, but also very, very judgmental of Cotton's actions. Suffice to say, Hank's first meeting with his half-brother is off to a bad start. The trip, however, forces the two to interact, eventually learning a lot about each other's lives and how similar they are to one another, even sharing the unfortunate trait of having a narrow urethra. In the end, the Hills leave Japan not only having honored Cotton's wartime legacy, but also having gained a deeper understanding of their own family bonds. The death of Cotton Hill. Much later, while dining at a Japanese restaurant, Cotton sparks chaos when he mistakes the cook for Emperor Hideki Tojo and picks a fight. In the scuffle, he's injured and accidentally eats a piece of shrimp, triggering a severe allergic reaction that sends him to the hospital. The doctor gives Hank and Peggy the prognosis and doesn't expect Cotton to survive yet. Cotton keeps talking, joking, and carrying on as if nothing is wrong, but Cotton's last days are marked by his stubborn refusal to go quietly. He even slips into death a few times, and eventually, while talking to Peggy, he passes away. Peggy gently tells Hank that Cotton has passed, and when Hank laments not being there, but Peggy reassures him, explaining that Cotton had said he cared for him and regretted not telling him in person. She adds that Cotton had even changed his mind about wanting his head cut off. Back at home, Hank installs a plaque on his newly built shed as a tribute to his father. The men of the alley admire their work and the memorial, that is, until the shed suddenly explodes. Dale cheers at the destruction and bolts off in satisfaction, proud to have fulfilled his promise to Cotton. Luanne's marriage and family. Before the wrap-up of the original show, let's check in on Luanne for a bit. By the end of the series, Luanne has grown from a naive beauty school student into a wife and mother. She marries Lucky Kleinschmidt, a totally laid-back dude, and the two of them have a daughter named Gracie. The chef of the hill. Bobby, the ever-curious boy, discovers he has a surprising talent for identifying cuts of beef after impressing Hank during a trip to the meat department. This leads to him joining the Heimlich County's meat evaluation team, where his knowledge helps the group advance to the state competition. Hank is thrilled to finally share a passion with his son and becomes deeply involved in helping Bobby train, while Peggy worries that too much pressure could take the fun out of it for him. At the state competition, Bobby's skills secure a victory for the team, making Hank prouder than ever. The episode ends with a heartfelt moment as Hank and Bobby stand side by side at the grill, cooking steaks together for the first time, while Peggy, Luanne, Lucky, and the neighbors look on. It is a quiet yet powerful closing scene that cements their bond, a father and son united over propane and perfectly cooked beef. The 2010s, The Hills Without Borders. Sometime later, Hank Hill receives a job offer to oversee propane and propane accessories for Aramco in Saudi Arabia. The Hills relocated overseas, renting out their house to Brian Robertson, while they settled into life on a base where Hank worked as assistant manager, steadily building their family's nest egg, while Peggy immersed herself in Arabic, adding another language to her repertoire, albeit not very well. Back in the States, Bobby chose to skip higher education and jump straight into the culinary world. Teaming up with Shane Wasanasong, he launched a Japanese-German fusion restaurant in Dallas, Texas called Robota Chain, running it as head chef and building his staff. He moves to Dallas with Joseph, living together at an apartment and working to support their lives. The lives of the Alley Boys changed as well. Bill fell into a depressive state after the Hills left, but found friends at a local barbershop. His depression would return when COVID hit, forcing the barbershop to close. Bill would hole himself up in his room, never going out, gaining weight, and finishing Netflix. Dale, on the other hand, runs for mayor of Arlen, winning, but only staying in office for 36 hours before resigning and challenging the results to expose corruption in the election. Boomhauer would go on to date a new girl, taking on her son, Luke Jr., to help her raise him as his own. During this period of time, the Sufanusiphones would divorce, with Con living in the garage. As for the kids, well, Connie started college. Post-2020, Return of the King. When the Hills return to Arlen, they're immediately struck by how much their hometown has transformed during their time away. Familiar landmarks are still there, but the details feel a little different. Public spaces now feature all-gender bathrooms, street signs have been modernized, and new businesses have boomed in town, with trendy restaurants serving dishes Hank can barely pronounce, like poke. Arlen may still be their home, but it no longer feels frozen in time. The Hills are left to grapple with these shifts, with Hank and Peggy trying to adjust to a community that has moved on without them. Bobby, now an adult, has matured into a confident young man pursuing his own passions, yet Hank still treats him like the same boy he raised, insisting that he knows better when it comes to things like grilling methods, the superiority of propane over charcoal, or even which beer has the best taste, which is completely subjective. This generational push and pull defines much of their relationship early on, with Bobby eager to prove himself while Hank struggles to let go of old habits. Peggy stands firmly in Bobby's corner though, often nudging Hank to involve him in family activities and reminding her husband that Bobby deserves to be treated as an equal and not just his son. Away from family dynamics, Hank faces his own internal battle with retirement. No longer defined by steady propane work, he throws himself into small projects and odd jobs, desperate to stay useful and resist the feeling of being left behind and bored. Peggy, meanwhile, wrestles with her own sense of purpose, seeing Min and Nancy thriving in their personal and professional lives. This leaves her feeling a little envious as her attempts to find meaningful work repeatedly fall short. Bobby, on the other hand, is thriving at his restaurant, but not without challenges. He faces a few road bumps, ranging from accusations of cultural appropriation to growing tension with the Wasanasongs, his business partners. Despite the professional hurdles, Bobby's personal life is on a steadier path. He shares a home with his childhood friend Joseph, navigates a few short-lived relationships, and eventually finds his way back to Connie Sufanusifo, rekindling a bond that never truly faded. And so, the Hills return, bringing their quirks, their heart, and their stubborn sense of tradition back to Arlen. The town may have changed, but with them home again, it feels whole, in a way it hadn't for years. At the end of the day, life in Arlen is better with the Hills right where they belong, and we can't wait to see what else they bring to the table. And that wraps up our video on the complete yet simplified King of the Hill timeline. Are y'all excited for more King of the Hill? Because I am. Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and remember, Frederator loves you.